profound that happens when you finally understand the weight of your own peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from having everything go your way, but the peace that settles in your spirit when you recognize that some battles aren't yours to fight, some arguments aren't yours to win, some people aren't yours to fix. I remember sitting with a young man once, brilliant mind, tremendous potential, but his eyes carried the exhaustion of 1,000 unnecessary wars. He told me about his workplace, how every day felt like navigating a minefield of egos and conflicts. Every slight, every snide remark, every passive-aggressive email, he responded to them all. He defended himself, explained himself, justified himself, and you know what was happening? He was shrinking, not physically, but spiritually. His light was dimming, because he was spending all his energy reacting to darkness. He asked me, how do I make them understand? How do I make them see that they're wrong? And I looked at him and said something that initially confused him. What if the goal isn't to make them understand? What if the goal is to preserve what God has placed inside you? See, we live in a culture that has trained us to respond to everything. Social media has made us believe that silence is weakness, that if you don't clap back, you are letting them win, that if you don't defend yourself, you are admitting guilt. But I want to challenge that entire framework today, because there's a dimension of spiritual maturity that we rarely discuss: the power of strategic silence, the strength in cutting people off without explanation, the wisdom in walking away without looking back. This isn't about being cold. This isn't about being unforgiving. This is about understanding that your energy is sacred, your peace is valuable, and your destiny is too important to be derailed by people who haven't been assigned to your journey. Let me take you back to something that happened in ancient times. There was a prophet, a man who carried the word of God with precision and power. One day, as he was traveling, some young men came out and began to mock him. Now, in our modern context, we might expect him to stop, to educate them, to try to reason with them, but he didn't. He kept walking. He didn't react. He didn't engage. He simply removed himself from their presence. And you know what happened? The moment he created that separation, the natural consequences of their own toxicity caught up with them. This story isn't about judgment or punishment. It's about understanding a spiritual principle. When you stop giving energy to negative frequencies, they lose their power over you. When you stop fighting battles that God hasn't assigned you, he fights battles you couldn't win on your own. Now, I want you to understand something crucial here. When I say cut them off silently, I'm not talking about hatred. I'm not talking about holding grudges. I'm talking about a deliberate, conscious decision to protect the atmosphere around your life. Because you see, every person carries an atmosphere. Some people bring peace wherever they go. Others bring peace when they leave. And it's not your job to fix the latter. It's your job to discern the difference. There was a businessman I knew, built his company from nothing. Started in a small room with just an idea and determination. As the business grew, so did his circle. More partners, more investors, more people with opinions about what he should do. And somewhere along the way, he noticed something strange. Every time he met with certain partners, he left feeling drained. Not just tired, drained, like something had been pulled out of him. His creativity would dry up. His vision would become cloudy. His decisions would be second guessed. For months, he tried to make it work. He had meetings about meetings. He explained his vision over and over. He defended his strategies. He reacted to every criticism, every doubt, every veiled insult, disguised as concern. And his business began to suffer. Not because the business model was wrong, but because he was investing his energy in the wrong conversations. Then one day, something shifted. He made a decision that everyone around him thought was crazy. He bought out those partners. No dramatic confrontation, no lengthy explanation, no final argument where he proved his point. He simply executed the legal agreements, sent the checks, and moved on. People asked him why. They wanted to know what happened. They wanted the story, the drama, the justification. And you know what he said? Nothing. He just smiled and changed the subject. 6 months later, his business had tripled. His creativity had returned. His peace was restored. And those former partners, they were still talking about what happened. Still trying to understand. Still creating narratives while he was creating wealth. This is what I'm trying to help you see. Your silence doesn't need to be understood by everyone. Your decisions don't need to be validated by people who weren't there when God gave you the vision. When you cut someone off silently, you're not being mysterious or playing games. You're being strategic with your spiritual energy. Think about a garden for a moment. When you plant seeds, you have to be intentional about what you allow to grow in that space. Weeds don't announce themselves. They don't send you a warning. They just show up and start competing with your crops for nutrients, water, and sunlight. Now, a wise gardener doesn't have a conversation with the weeds. Doesn't try to convince the weeds to become flowers. Doesn't spend emotional energy being angry at the weeds for being weeds. The gardener simply pulls them out quietly, efficiently, without ceremony. That's what you're doing when you cut toxic people off silently. You're gardening your life. You're making space for what matters by removing what doesn't. And the beautiful thing, you don't owe the weed an explanation for why it can't stay in your garden. But here's where it gets deeper. The reason this is so difficult for many of us is because we've been conditioned to believe that we owe people access to us. That if someone has been in our life, they have some kind of permanent visa to our peace. We feel guilty for setting boundaries. We feel like we're being mean or harsh when we decide that someone can no longer have the same access they once had. I need you to understand something that will change your life. Access is earned, not entitled. Just because someone was in your life yesterday doesn't mean they've qualified for tomorrow. Just because someone helped you in chapter 3 doesn't mean they're supposed to be in chapter 7. And just because you have history with someone doesn't mean you have to sacrifice your future to maintain that history. There's a difference between being grateful for someone's past contribution and being imprisoned by it. You can honor what was without being bound to what's no longer serving you. This is maturity. This is wisdom. This is self-respect. I've watched people stay in friendships that died years ago simply because they didn't know how to execute the exit. They kept showing up to gatherings they didn't want to attend. They kept responding to messages that drained them. They kept pretending everything was fine when internally they knew the relationship had run its course. And all of this performance, all of this pretense, it was killing something inside them. Here's what I've learned. The death of a relationship doesn't always require a funeral. Sometimes it just requires distance. Not drama, just distance. Not explanations, just boundaries. Not arguments, just absence. When you react, you give power. When you explain, you give access. When you argue, you give energy. But when you simply remove yourself, you reclaim all three. Your power returns, your access is protected. Your energy is preserved. Let me tell you about a young woman who discovered this truth the hard way. She was in a relationship that everyone around her could see was toxic except her. He would criticize her in public, then love bomb her in private. He would tear down her confidence, then build it just enough to keep her dependent on his validation. Her friends tried to tell her, her family tried to intervene, but she kept defending him. She kept reacting to their concerns. She kept explaining why it wasn't as bad as it looked. Then one day, after another humiliating incident, something clicked. She didn't make a scene. She didn't post about it on social media. She didn't send a long text message explaining all the ways he'd hurt her. She just stopped responding, stopped showing up, stopped being available. And when he came looking for explanations, demanding to know what changed, she said 7 words that transformed her life. I'm choosing me. There's nothing to discuss. He was furious. He told mutual friends she was being childish. He said she owed him a conversation. He tried every manipulation tactic in the book, but she held her ground. Not with anger, not with bitterness, but with a quiet, unshakable resolve that her peace was worth more than his understanding. 2 years later, I saw her again. She was unrecognizable in the best way possible. Her confidence had returned. Her light had been restored. She had built a life that she didn't need to recover from every evening. And when I asked her about that season, she said something profound. I spent so much time trying to make him understand why he was hurting me. I never realized that I didn't need him to understand. I just needed to leave. That's the revelation right there. You don't need people to understand why you're protecting yourself. You don't need their permission to set boundaries. You don't need their approval to walk away. Their understanding is not a prerequisite for your freedom. Now, I know some of you are thinking, but what about reconciliation? What about forgiveness? What about giving people second chances? And these are valid questions, but here's the distinction we must make. Forgiveness doesn't mean restoration. You can forgive someone and still know that they can't come back into your life with the same access. You can pray for someone's well-being while maintaining a boundary for your own. You can wish someone well from a distance. This isn't contradiction. This is wisdom. The Bible speaks of a time for everything, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away. Some of you are in a season where God is asking you to throw away not the people necessarily, but the access those people have to your peace, your energy, your vision. And here's the difficult truth. Some people in your life are spiritual assignments, but not for the purpose you think. They weren't sent to help you. They were sent to test you, to see if you've learned how to protect what God has given you, to see if you've matured enough to recognize what doesn't serve your calling, to see if you love yourself enough to walk away from what looks good but feels wrong. When you keep reacting to every provocation, every slight, every challenge to your peace, you're failing the test. Because the test isn't about proving you're right. The test is about proving you're ready for the next level. And you can't get to the next level while you're still fighting battles from the previous one. I've seen anointed people, gifted people, people with world-changing potential stuck in the same place for years because they couldn't master this principle. They kept engaging with their detractors. They kept explaining themselves to people who had already decided not to understand. They kept fighting for relationships that God was trying to remove from their path. And meanwhile, their destiny was waiting. Their purpose was calling. The people who were supposed to connect with them were searching. But they couldn't move forward because they were anchored to the past by their need to react, to explain, to make people see. Here's a powerful truth. Silent moves are the most powerful moves. When you're plotting your exit, don't announce it. When you're setting boundaries, don't debate them. When you're cutting people off, don't justify it. Just do it. Let your actions speak. Let your absence explain. Let your peace be your statement. Let your peace, because at the end of the day, the people who were meant to be in your life won't need an explanation for your boundaries. They'll respect them. And the people who fight against your peace were never meant to be there in the first place. You see, there's something that happens in the spiritual realm when you finally stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. It's like a lock clicks open. A door that was jammed suddenly swings free. And you realize that all this time, they weren't stuck because of them. You were stuck because you kept trying to bring them with you to a place they weren't assigned to go. I once knew a teacher, a remarkable woman with a gift for bringing out potential in her students. She worked at a school where the administration was dysfunctional. To put it mildly, every staff meeting was a battle. Every new initiative was met with resistance. She had colleagues who would undermine her in front of students, who would gossip about her methods, who would sabotage projects she was passionate about. For 3 years, she fought. She presented data showing her students improvement. She addressed every false rumor. She attended every meeting ready to defend her approach. She lost sleep preparing rebuttals to criticisms that hadn't even been spoken yet. And you know what happened? The resistance didn't decrease, it intensified, because she was operating under a false belief that if she could just explain it right, present it better, prove it more thoroughly, they would finally understand. Then one summer, something broke inside her. Not in a bad way, but in a necessary way. Like an egg breaking so the bird can be born. She realized she had been pouring herself into a system that was designed to contain her, not celebrate her. And she made a decision that confused everyone who knew her. She didn't quit with a dramatic resignation letter. She didn't call out the administration publicly. She didn't gather her allies for one final stand. She simply applied for a position at another school, got accepted, and turned in a 2-sentence resignation. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm pursuing a different path. The staff wanted meetings. They wanted explanations. Some of her colleagues felt betrayed. How could she leave without fighting harder? The administration was shocked. They thought she was too invested to ever actually leave. Everyone had an opinion about what she should have done differently, and she listened to none. Instead of it, she packed her classroom, said her goodbyes to students, and walked out. 5 years later, she's now the principal of a school that's become a model for educational excellence in her region. Students are thriving. Teachers are inspired. Parents are engaged. And that old school still having the same arguments in the same dysfunctional meetings with the same resistant people. This is the power of the silent court. She didn't destroy the bridge with explosives. She simply stopped crossing it. And in doing so, she freed herself to build new bridges to places that actually wanted what she was carrying. Now, let me address something that I know is stirring in some of your hearts right now. You're thinking about that family member, that friend who's been in your life since childhood, that person who knows all your history, and the thought of cutting them off even silently feels like betrayal. It feels wrong. It feels cruel. But I want to reframe something for you. Loyalty to dysfunction is not virtue, it's slavery. When you remain connected to people who consistently drain you, manipulate you, belittle you, or block your growth, not because of love, but because of obligation, you're not being faithful. You're being foolish. There's a story about a man who owned a small tech startup. He had a business partner, someone he'd known since university. They started the company together, dreamed together, struggled together. But as the company began to grow, something became evident. The partner wasn't growing with it. His skills hadn't evolved. His work ethic had declined. His attitude had become toxic. He would shoot down new ideas, resist necessary changes, and create division among the team. The founder knew something had to change, but the guilt was crushing him. This was his friend. They had history. They had weathered storms together. How could he cut off someone who had been there from the beginning? So he tried everything else first. He offered training programs. He had honest conversations. He adjusted roles. He gave second chances, third chances, 10th chances. And the company suffered. Good employees left. Opportunities were missed. Growth stagnated. Finally, a mentor asked him a question that changed everything. What will you tell your future employees when they ask why you let one person's inability to grow destroy opportunities for dozens of others? What will you tell your children when they ask why you sacrifice their inheritance to protect someone else's ego? That question shattered his paralysis. Within a month, he had initiated a buyout. No angry confrontation. No public shaming, no burning of bridges, just a clean professional separation. He wrote a generous check, thanked his former partner for the early years, and moved on. The partner was angry, felt betrayed, told everyone who would listen that he'd been wronged, but the founder didn't engage, didn't defend himself, didn't try to control the narrative. He just focused on building. And within 2 years, the company had quadrupled in value. The team was cohesive. Innovation was flowing, and that former partner still telling the same story to anyone who would listen. While the founder was changing lives and creating generational wealth. This is what I need you to understand. Your obligation is not to preserve relationships that God is trying to dissolve. Your obligation is to steward what is placed in your hands. And sometimes stewarding your calling requires the courage to disappoint people who expect you to stay small for their comfort. There's a principle in nature that we often overlook. When a tree is surrounded by plants that compete for the same nutrients, the tree doesn't argue with those plants. It doesn't try to convince them to take nutrients from somewhere else. The tree simply sends its roots deeper, accessing resources that the shallow-rooted plants can't reach. And eventually, the tree outgrows the competition not by fighting it, but by accessing a source it can't touch. That's what happens when you cut people off silently. You stop competing on their level. You stop arguing on their terms. You stop accessing the shallow wells of validation, explanation, and approval. Instead, you go deeper. Deeper into your purpose, deeper into your peace, deeper into the resources that God has reserved for people who refuse to be distracted by surface level drama. I want to talk about something that might make some of you uncomfortable, but it's necessary. There are people in your life right now who are addicted to your reaction. They provoke you, not because they care about the issue, but because they are addicted to the attention that your response gives them. They criticize you not to help you improve, but because your defense makes them feel powerful. They create problems not to solve them, but because your emotional investment validates their existence. And every time you react, you're feeding an addiction. Every time you explain, you're enabling dysfunction. Every time you engage, you're reinforcing behavior that's destroying both of you. The most loving thing you can do for them and for yourself is to stop participating in the cycle. Not with anger, not with announcements, just with absence. There was a woman, a content creator who had built a significant following online. Her work was inspiring thousands of people. But there was one person, someone from her past, who would show up in her comments regularly with criticism. Not constructive feedback, pure criticism. Tearing down her ideas, questioning her motives, mocking her appearance, challenging her credibility. For months, she responded to every comment. She tried reasoning, she tried kindness, she tried humor, she tried firm boundaries stated publicly. Nothing worked. Because this person didn't want resolution, they wanted reaction, and she kept giving it to them. Then one day, she made a simple change. She blocked the person. No announcement, no final message, no explanation post about why she was doing it. She just quietly removed their access. And something remarkable happened. Not just for her, but in her community. Other people who had been silently watching this toxic dynamic felt permission to set their own boundaries. Her content improved because she wasn't creating from a defensive posture anymore. Her mental health stabilized because she wasn't starting each day dreading what this person would say. And that person, they created new accounts, tried different ways to get her attention, told mutual connections that she was being unreasonable, but she never responded, never acknowledged, never gave them the satisfaction of knowing they still mattered enough to provoke a reaction. And eventually, like all things deprived of fuel, the fire went out. This is the power you have. The power to simply stop feeding what's trying to consume you. The power to withdraw your energy from what doesn't deserve it. The power to protect your peace without apology. But here's what you must understand. This kind of strength doesn't come from hardening your heart. It comes from knowing the value of what you're protecting. When you truly understand the weight of your calling, the significance of your purpose, the preciousness of your peace, cutting people off becomes an act of stewardship, not selfishness. Think about a bank vault. It's not locked because the bank is mean or unwelcoming. It's locked because what's inside is valuable. Your energy is valuable. Your peace is valuable. Your focus is valuable. Your time is valuable. And just like a bank doesn't give vault access to everyone who walks through the door, you don't have to give life access to everyone who wants in. Some of you have been living with your vault wide open, letting anyone wander in and take what they want. You wonder why you are depleted, why you are exhausted, why you feel like you're running on empty. Is because you haven't learned to guard what matters. You haven't learned that silence is sometimes the strongest lock. I'm going to tell you something that might initially sound harsh, but I need you to hear it. Not everyone deserves to know your next move. Not everyone deserves to understand your decisions. Not everyone deserves access to your process. And the moment you accept this truth, you stop feeling guilty about privacy, boundaries, and selective silence. There's a reason why every significant thing in nature happens in hiddenness first. The seed germinates underground before it breaks through soil. The baby develops in the womb before it's born into the world. The butterfly transforms inside the chrysalis before it emerges with wings. Hiddenness isn't just protection, it's the necessary environment for transformation. When you keep explaining your growth to people who are invested in your stagnation, you're bringing your chrysalis into hostile territory. When you keep defending your boundaries to people who benefit from you having none, you're inviting sabotage into your transformation. When you keep justifying your silence to people who want you to speak so they can argue, you're delaying your own emergence. Cut them off silently, not because you hate them, not because you are bitter, but because you are too focused on becoming to be distracted by explaining. You are too committed to your transformation to be derailed by their confusion. You're too protective of your peace to sacrifice it for their understanding. And here's the beautiful thing about silent courts. They allow for future redemption without present compromise. When you cut someone off with drama, with arguments and accusations and burn bridges, you create a permanent chasm. But when you cut someone off silently, you create space for them to grow. Space for you to grow. Space for the relationship to possibly be restored in the future. But only if both parties have evolved. You're not slamming the door. You're just stepping back and letting it close naturally. And if they grow into someone who respects boundaries, values, peace, and contributes positively, the door can open again. But it will open to a different version of both of you. And if they never grow, the door stays closed. And you've lost nothing but dysfunction. This is wisdom. This is maturity. This is the kind of strength that builds legacies. Because the people who change the world aren't the ones who spend their lives reacting to critics. They are the ones who learn to move in silence, build in peace, and cut off distractions with the precision of a surgeon, not to harm, but to heal. So today, I'm giving you permission to stop explaining, permission to stop defending, permission to stop reacting, permission to protect your peace with the same intensity that others attack it. Permission to walk away from arguments you don't need to win. Relationships you don't need to fix, and people you don't need to convince. Your silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. Your absence is not cruelty, it's clarity. Your boundaries are not barriers. They are bridges to the version of yourself that's been waiting for you to finally choose you, to the life that's been calling you, to the peace that's been pursuing you, to the purpose that's been patient with you. Stop reacting, cut them off silently, and watch how quickly your life transforms when you redirect all that defensive energy into offensive progress. Watch how fast you move when you're no longer dragging dead weight. Watch how high you soar when you're no longer anchored to people who were meant to be lessons, not lifetime companions. Your future is waiting, but it can't begin until you finish what needs to end. And sometimes the most powerful ending isn't written with words. It's written with silence. It's executed with distance. It's sealed with peace. This is your moment. Not to burn bridges, but to stop crossing the ones that lead nowhere. Not to become cold, but to finally become free. Not to hate anyone, but to finally fully, unapologetically love yourself enough to protect what God has placed inside you. Don't react. Cut them off silently and step into the peace, the purpose, and the power that's been waiting for someone brave enough to choose it.